And I, for my quarterly plan, for what it's worth, so for September to December, I'm going to be leaning into the whole content production thing because the more thought that I've been putting into it, it's really silly in this day and age to not produce content for the internet in some shape or form, and it's really silly to not do it on a place where you can monetize. So it's like if you're not even in the first category, then find a way to capture enough of what you do to be in the first category. I watched a video today of people making ramen in Korea, and it was super enticing. It was like 20 minutes of silent video, basically, of these master chefs in Korea making this ramen, and it showed their whole process from the broth to the noodles and how they hand make the noodles and what they, all these tools that they had for the eggs that I didn't know that there were so many tools to like crack eggs. And it was just really fascinating. And I can't imagine that it didn't do two things. I'm sure that a sizable percentage of the audience who saw that on YouTube was like, I want ramen, and more specifically, I want this ramen. So they had probably immediately flooded the restaurant even more than the restaurant was already flooded. But B, there's a lot of people who don't have access to that restaurant who just wanted ramen. So the positive externality for all ramen restaurants went up because somebody decided to take a really, really high quality 8K camera and record the process of ramen making. And that's kind of what I mean by category one, where I think that on this kind of tapestry of a career that I was just describing a minute ago, everyone kind of has a goal of mastery and a goal of value being provided to somebody. And when you work for someone else, they're just operating at a scale where they get to take credit for the work that you did. Basically, right? In any shape and form, where it's like you might not necessarily want to be in the public eye, which is totally admirable and totally acceptable. But I don't think it's possible to not be in the public eye in any shape or form. I don't think privacy really exists in the framework that we describe it, right? So I think that the kind of ideal of privacy is to be able to remove oneself from the public eye. But when you really think about the public eye as kind of more of an exchange, then it's like, oh, well, yeah, of course, I do want to be able to go to the Agora and sell my wares. I want to be able to sell my bonnets, or I want to be able to sell my oranges, or I want to be able to basically show off the best production that I can do. And the way to do that in this day and age is to participate on the internet. And then I think that leads to my second point, where if you are going to participate on the internet because you want to have more leverage for your career and you want to have less people to report to who are going to be capturing that value for themselves, I think it's important to choose a platform or a collection of platforms where you can monetize your work, or there is a path to monetization that's already built into the system, because it's really hard to build that system while also paying attention to the value that you want to be adding in the thing that you want to be doing. And it's not always easy to be a business owner and have to constantly worry about all the things that you need to get done. It's much easier to have machines do that stuff for you. So in the case of streaming, I don't think Twitch is perfect. I don't think YouTube is perfect, but for fucking sure, I think they're better than Twitter. I think that the stuff that people post on Twitter is more about social validation than it is about providing value. And let me clarify what I mean by that, because there has to be some quantification there for my argument to make sense. So if you're watching a video on YouTube, there's two ways to use YouTube, broadly speaking. There's the recommendation engine way, and then there's the search engine way. So the recommendation engine way of using YouTube is that you sit on the homepage, and YouTube and TikTok and these apps this ilk of apps have done enough research about you and seen enough of the kind of content that you like to consume that they suggest to you content that you might be interested in, or they will put you in a latent space of ideas that you might not have known existed. For example, me today watching the salt farmers video and the ramen video, just a fun thing. But now I know a little bit more about salt farmers in India. Now I know a little bit more about how ramen is made in Korea. So that's the recommendation engine side of using YouTube. The second side is more obvious. It's the search engine side. The search engine side of YouTube is you are actively looking to solve a problem. So, for example, for me, I want to be able to stream make a Twitch stream and have a high enough quality camera that satisfies my desire to have a high quality stream. But I also want to be able to afford it. So being able to find the overlap, the Venn diagram of those, means finding the right resource that has that. And there are a lot of YouTube videos that have that, right? There's some blogs, but blogs these days are super weighed down by ads unless they're on a few specific sites, is the big problem with a lot of blogs on the internet these days. Versus Twitter, right? So let's say that Twitter also has both, right? Twitter has a recommendation engine and Twitter also has a search engine. The recommendation engine is kind of a people powered curation service where you'll be on Twitter and you'll see retweets from people who either think similarly to you or want to teach you something, or retweets from your friends about things that you might like. So it's not necessarily a recommendation engine in the sense that the algorithm is suggesting something for you. It's a recommendation engine that's largely powered by the members and the people of Twitter. Twitter search engine is bad. I've never really liked searching on Twitter. But it is functional. You could do the same thing. You could type in OBS camera less than $700 and you could probably find someone tweeting about it. The main problem with consuming a lot of Twitter is that the value stops at like a very low bar. The reason that Twitter is so popular in a lot of ways is because of its ease of consumption. It's really, really easy to make a tweet, which means that everybody is tweeting, but only the best tweets filter because of the people curation metric that I was just talking about. But the best tweet is probably less valuable than the worst video. And what I mean by that is just sheer amount of contextual data being captured in the box, right? So a tweet at 140 characters is a certain amount of kilobytes. A video has a lot more data. You can get a lot more interaction from a person's facial expressions. You can understand the tenor of their voice to kind of what they're trying to describe. The topic that they're discussing might, interest you or not interest you, and you can click off, you can leave, or you can deep dive it and by going to their channel. And Twitter doesn't really supply any of that. And then on top of all of that, if you are a creator on Twitter, which it includes just tweeting a lot, it's really hard to see a path to monetization and capturing. So I guess let me dive into that a little bit. So like when you want to monetize your tweets, there's been a few ways that Twitter has tried to do this in the past with like Twitter Blue and stuff, but there is no good way to monetize in the sense of capturing both user attention for a long enough period of time, but also I think basically the landscape of Twitter was made for more signaling than it was for value capturing. And what I mean by that is that Twitter is notorious for the culture of, maybe dunking is the right term, the culture of just kind of one upping, maybe is a better way of looking at it, where a lot of Twitter, because of the people curation, I think actually partially, is favored by people who can say the thing that incites people the most to want to do something. And that type of environment isn't very good for advertisers, but also an extension, it's not good for products, right? Because even if you have a really great product, compressing it into a tweet isn't necessarily, it's kind of in the same vein of like, oh well, you could compress it into an executive summary or like an elevator pitch. And I don't think that that's entirely incorrect, but again, given the kind of layout and framework of Twitter, I don't really think that an executive summary, an elevator pitch, is a short description of what your thing does. A tweet is a short description of a emotion for the most part about what a thing does. I've very rarely seen good tweets about products. And this is my own experience too from running stenography, where there's the whole kind of work in public aesthetic and writing tweets that are interesting. I don't know. Maybe as I kind of like think about it more, I'm trying to mentally place the distance between a Twitter and a YouTube. And I think, and just like a regular website. And I think that I'd have to look more into the history of the internet and why certain sites are the way that they are. Because, you know, when I think of monetization, broadly speaking, it's like ads. And nobody really likes ads, but we all kind of understand the value addition that they give to society. But we do want to like put heavy barricades around them so that they don't seep into regular language. Because if you don't know if you're getting sold on something, then it can kind of not only just ruin the trust of the individual, but can also be damaging to the overall structure of the host language, which is actually a really interesting kind of thing. So maybe I'll double down on the first point and then maybe not retract fully, but step back on the second point until I can find more concrete evidence. So my first point was that posting content on the internet is something that you should be doing pretty much full stop. And I struggle to think of a vertical in a career, and I mean that for a career standpoint. I don't mean posting for a personal standpoint. I don't really think that there's a lot to be added in the personal space. If anything, maybe that's actually the cardinal problem that we've seen with the internet over the past decade and a half, is that people have used the internet for too much personal shit. Like, let's scale back the amount of personal shit on the internet and let's put more useful shit on the internet. There's too much that we know about people's day-to-day lives that just isn't helpful or isn't at all engaging. And we know too little about things that can help people get unstuck with problems that they run into. Like, it feels so good to run into an accepted Stack Overflow answer that just gets you unstuck. It feels even better when the development team of a project find that Stack Overflow answer and integrate it into the next release of the software so that you don't even have to worry about it. It feels so good to find a YouTube video that already has the solution that you need. It feels even better when they put it in the first 15 seconds of the video, so you don't have to watch the next 9 minutes if you don't want to. And yeah, I think it opens it by not posting on the internet. A career loses multiple angles of attack and multiple layers of defense. And if you were a general, then you would want to use all the weapons in your arsenal to increase the value of your business product. And the way to do that is to use the internet. Basically, it's to open up your product, open up your career to scrutiny, but the right kind of scrutiny. Because it's the same thing as deliberate practice in a lot of ways. You're forced to face the reality of the limit of your ability in a way where if you grow, your product will get better. Like there's a certain level of quality that I'm trying to build with these streams and the videos that are coming out of it, more importantly. And I've started to figure out things that I can improve on. You know, like I watched that last video that I made about Leibniz and binary and the I Ching. And I was like, yeah, slideshows are just kind of meh. You know, like it was definitely a good step. Like I think that I knew that I didn't want to just do a slideshow without my face showing. And I knew that I didn't want to just do a vlog without helper material, text and images and things like that. And I knew that my video editing skills weren't at a point at the time where I could really justify, you know, going in the video editing process and taking care of all those things. I just didn't have enough bandwidth to learn all three of those things. But being able to critically examine the product from a point of not even just engagement, but just kind of like intrigue and the amount of things learned, there was a good learning opportunity there for me. And I was able to build that transparent advanced slides addition into OBS, which attracted a lot of attention within the Obsidian community because people were like, oh, damn, that's cool. And it is cool. It's cool to look at, right? It's like it's this camera has, you know, I set up the lighting in a way that it's good to look at me in this lighting, and I, you know, put the microphone in such a position where it's, you know, I still could have better sound, but so yeah, I think that in some, whatever your career is, find a way to extract value from it and post it on the internet is pretty unassailable. The second point about now do it in a place where you can be monetized is more about diversification than anything. Because if number one is satisfied, the idea is generally that there's a thing before number one. So it's like, oh, what is your career path of choice? You're a coder, or you're a woodworker, or you're a chef, or fuck it, you're an Indian salt farmer, right? Like that video of the Indian salt farms was so captivating, and it took somebody with thousands of dollars of camera gear to come down and kind of like watch them for a month and then take it back to their computers, and then like it gets shipped all over the world, and it shows the way that these companies are taking advantage of these salt farmers because of some historical stuff that happened back in the colonial era when the British owned India. And that's just so interesting, and that would have never been entered my mind as another human without the lattice of the internet projecting that to me. And that's a pro and a con, of course, right? But the idea would be for these salt farmers that if they had their own way of recording what they did, whether through written work or images or video, they could do the work of sharing themselves, right? And then they could also reap the rewards of maybe being able to sell directly to different distributors that they wouldn't have had access to, because the distributors didn't know about them, or they get to plaster ads all over their thing, or work with other salt things or whatever. There's a lot of non-linear opportunities that come out of internet content creation, and I think that in this day and age, it's silly to not post your career on the internet in some shape or form. And it is something that I think actively creates new avenues and new routes for a career that couldn't have existed if you didn't post on the internet. So I've said this thesis before. This is nothing new, but I just wanted to kind of go back over it again.